The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
All right, I just want to welcome everybody to the webinar here for creating performance objectives with style. I'm just going to hold off for one more moment. I see people populated in. This gives a little chance to kind of get yourself situated, and hopefully, if you have to adjust any audio settings, grab a pair of headphones or something. We can do that right now. But I'll give you a couple moments, and then we'll jump in and continue the presentation here. We'll start it off actually. And it said if you have any questions or comments, direct them to the questions panel. You could type it in there. We have a couple people monitoring the question area. So if you do have any questions in the presentation, definitely feel free to reach out to us. If you are interested in a certificate, those will be in a recording of the presentation. Those are going to be emailed out to you by ACCSC after the presentation. So within the next day or so, you'll get a link that will be able to view the presentation in case you want to share it with anybody or rewatch it if you had so much fun. And then you'll have a certificate you can download. You can print it out and hand it out to anybody. Down in our handout section 2, there's some information down there. So if you check out the handouts, you can see a sign-in sheet. So if you need a sign-in sheet for your campus or for your group, you're more than welcome to print out our sign-in sheet and kind of record the attendees at your campus. So it looks like everything's going well. So I'm just going to kick us off here and just kind of introduce ourselves. I'm partnered here with Aaron Appleby. Aaron, say hi to everybody for me.
Hi, everybody.
Thank you, Aaron. Aaron and I, we are educators, instructional designers, and what we work for is a company called Ciena. And basically, we are committed to being a good part of the delivering content solution and the method with you guys. So if you do see us, you might have seen us. We help and assist and consult with licensing, compliance, and accreditation. We also develop curriculum. That's where Aaron and I fall into. So we are in the Apple category there. We also do software development and support. So if there's any software solutions you may need for student management and so on, we take care of that stuff too. And we do branded marketing, so websites or offline content. We kind of hit a couple big buckets there, and we are excited to partner with ACCSC and be part of finding solutions to help us and our students succeed in the classroom. So just kind of going over a quick agenda here, just so we could plan out our path to this webinar. What we want to do with performance objectives is start with the foundation, moving into different learning styles and how that affects the performance objectives, going into cognitive learning styles as well. And so what we want to do is kind of start with foundation, move into different types. And then as you're going through this, if you kind of keep in the back of your mind, how this can be applied in your own classroom, hopefully you could pick up a thing or two and make your class even better. So let's start off with foundation, and I'll start us off here, Aaron, if you don't mind. So I got the ball rolling here. So foundation, what we want to do is we want to begin with a foundation, because you cannot build something great without a solid foundation, like anything, building a house or so on. So what we want to do is we want to ask ourselves, basically, what is a performance objective? And before I do that, I'd like to share with you a little bit and get some comments from you in case anybody has worked with performance objectives or you've seen objectives in your own class. I'd like to see, and if you could put this in the question panel, how can performance objectives benefit students? And so, I know we're going to gather up some ideas. I think Aaron's going to monitor the chat here for a second. But as we gather some responses, I first want to share how it could actually benefit maybe us, the instructors or the administrators. And so regarding us, performance objectives let us plan, prepare, organize our course in accordance with the successful achievement of whatever result we're looking for. So basically, it helps us become, more focused, more organized in our classroom. And I think it answers the questions, how do we know when our students are effective? And so relating to students, Aaron, anything come in, or do you have any ideas of maybe from your own experiences of what you think might benefit students with performance objectives?
Yeah, so I'm seeing some things come in. They're definitely good. And first, I just want to touch on if you were at this previous Tuesday's webinar, go to the ACCSC website. A link to the video will be there as well as an area to get the certificate. It should be available on the ACCSC website, and they handle that. If you are not able to find that, definitely get in contact with them and let them know. But that is the information we definitely have there. So it should be there, though, if not now, in a couple days or so.
Yep.
But some of the ideas coming in, definitely really good. You know, clear expectations. We're making sure the student is understanding, you know, what is going to be taught in either a lesson, in a given course. They're understanding what they should be getting out of it so they can, you know, kind of prepare themselves in that same way. And so we're starting to see that, giving, you know, clear information, discussing the subject matter. It sets a goal, which that's a really good one, because essentially we are trying to establish goals with clear criteria, which we'll definitely get into a lot more. And so, yeah, I think these are some good ones. Basically, the foundation for, you know, we have an idea of how we want to structure our course or our lesson, and now we're trying to create these, you know, clear criteria so that, you know, we as educators understand what's going on, but the students, they need to know the expectations. They need to know what's expected of them, as well as what they can expect and be ready for.
Perfect. Thank you, Aaron. Those are awesome. Those are awesome examples. I appreciate all the feedback in the question section. So to circle back real quick, we have all these great things that Aaron just described about how it can help students. We touched on real quickly how it could help, you know, the teachers and administrators of the campus. So I kind of want to circle back and say, you know, what is it? If you haven't seen them before, if you're not really sure, if you're joining us and you're like, I just don't have a clear picture of what a performance objective or an objective is. Basically, on like your syllabus, you might have an area where it says the students will something, ... Or it might say by the end of the course, the students will, and that's the objective. It's kind of like, you know, a focused goal. A goal might be some general topic, and then the objective is going to be something that's more detailed. So the students will do something. And so what we want to do is, after we find out the foundation, we want to show you some good and bad type of performance objectives and share with you some of the wording to help you kind of sculpt a good performance objective. So kind of keep this in mind as we go through the presentation today. Keep in mind, by the end of the course, the students will, and then see how that you could end that sentence with maybe a course that you've taught or are teaching or will teach in the future. So in general, to summarize a lot of stuff that we just went through the comments and the questions, is basically it helps us start and it helps the students start with the end in mind. And it also provides growth and guidance and helps evaluate success. So those are kind of like the three overarching goals that we're looking for, and why performance objectives matter and how it's important to, you know, not only us, the instructors and the administrators, but to the students as well. So with all these positives in mind, let's start taking a look at, you know, how an objective is made up. So right here, I got the good and bad. So what we want to do is establish what a good verb is. So we said, you know, at the end of the course, the students will. And so what are they going to do in your course? So what makes a good verb can make a good performance objectives? Well, what a good verb should be done and what the performance objective should do is it should be simple. It should be focused. And so words like identify up on there, and it says sort, compare, contrast, and solve are good ones. There are some, you know, I say, you know, good ones that we'll share more throughout the presentation. So these are just kind of to get you off the gate. Aaron will definitely share a lot more types of verbs because I like seeing what people use in their own objectives. And so we just kind of went around and talked to my colleagues. I looked at my own syllabi and Aaron looked at his syllabi, and we kind of found some good action verbs to, you know, be the foundation of our performance objectives. And what you want to do is avoid ones that are kind of broad or they're complicated. Again, you want to keep them simple and focused. So things like know, understand, appreciate, enjoy, and believe, they're okay, you know, but they're not really good ones because you might not know, like, how do you prove that a student knows something or how they understand. And that can be taken in different ways. Whereas good ones are kind of more measurable. So that you could, if they have to identify this, this, and this, you could definitely figure out what this, and this is. And you can kind of see, is the student succeeding or are they not succeeding?
And David, on top of that, we have some nice comments that are coming in that I also wanted to make note of is, as David's, excuse me, as David started to touch on, these need to be measurable in some form or fashion. So we're essentially trying to, in creating these for ourselves as educators, for the students and any other educators that might teach a given course or lesson we make, we're trying to set guidelines, set criteria so that it is no longer subjective. Both you and the student will agree whether they have met a learning goal, whether they have achieved what was intended by having this clear-cut criteria. And as David's saying, if you have something like know and understand, all of a sudden you're getting very subjective with it. And, a student might need to know something, they might need to understand something, but when you're writing a performance objective, you want to get beyond that and try and create something, as someone said, it needs to be measurable and observable.
Perfect. That's good. That's going to be a key word. I'm going to bring it up a little bit later, which is a good transition to a couple other sections, but keep that word measurable in mind. How can you measure it? I like that. Thank you, Aaron, and thank you, everybody. There's a lot of good stuff in here.
Yep. And to address some other questions coming in, so Bloom's taxonomy we will be talking about later in this webinar, and then the webinar will be recorded and posted on ACCSC, so you will see all our responses to the questions and everything like that. It will all be included in that in the same way that you're seeing it now.
Thank you very much. All right, so we got like the foundation of good and bad, and we're keeping that word measurable in mind as we do it, and thinking about some maybe good action verbs that you might come up with too. So what we're going to do is see like where these performance objectives may focus on, and there's three like big overarching areas where it will focus on. Kind of like the think. What do you want students to know or understand? It might focus on the feel. How do you want students to feel or respond to something? And then there's the do, which I think is important in our sector, is what actions or what processes do you want students to take on, relating to a certain topic? And so far we want objectives that have good action verbs that can be measured or verified, and have objectives that cover what students, understand or how they respond or what actions to take. And so with that in mind, I want to kind of cover another topic here. And this is where we're kind of getting into kind of three different spheres. So we have this nifty Venn diagram, and it shows three different types of objectives. And first we have the theoretical objectives. And these are the ones that focus on knowledge and the why of a particular topic. Maybe it's the theory or explanation of a topic. And then on the other side, we have the practical objective. These are like the skills and possibly technical techniques that you want the students to accomplish. And so what I think of, towards the end of a lesson or the end of the course, I like to have objectives that kind of meet this mixing of the two, the theoretical and practical, and have this actionable type of objectives. And this will showcase both the theoretical and the practical learning that a student has gone through from start to the finish of your class. And as all the great people have said on our question page here, it needs to be measurable. And I do want to stress that, so I appreciate you guys mentioning it right off the bat here. Keep that in mind. Again, when you think of good verbs, I always think right afterwards, can this be measured somehow? And so always keep in mind that they need to be measured, they need to be observable, and they need to be verified. So whether you use good objectives that cover, how a student thinks, how they feel, or what he or she does, and whether you have, say, theoretical, practical, or actionable ones, these all must be measurable. There's a little catchy thing I like to use that's kind of like a nice, summary of what you could maybe share with your fellow instructors or have, at your desk at the ready, just as you're maybe making performance objectives. And I call these the ABCs of writing objectives. So when you're writing them down and you're developing a course, you want to think of A for audience. Think of the who, in which this case is the student. And so your objective must be more specific. Instead of just saying maybe the students will be able to, like we mentioned earlier, maybe you could think of your audience in mind. And sometimes I like to write the medical assisting student will be able to. And that kind of, again, it gets that focus down to really have you think, what do you want the medical assisting to do, the dental assisting student or the business student? And so think about your audience as you're making up these performance objectives and you're writing them down. B is for behavior. And when you think of behavior, think of what the student is expected to do or what skill the student is expected to have. In our case, think about real world skills whenever possible. As this can help with that, that end goal of student, earning a career in his or her field of interest. C is for condition, and this can encompass the equipment or the tools that can be used. It could also include the environmental conditions, certain types of laboratory conditions, or is it, business office conditions and so on. And this could be, just to give an example, it could be like, an objective could be like, given the sickle probe, the dental assistant students will something, 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 or given the following environment of, and you can say, what the environment might be, the students will be able to, blank, blank, and blank. So think of the condition as part of maybe the learning objectives if it's, applicable. D is for degree, and this states the acceptance of what a performance that a student should be able to do. And what that means is that the objective may have the phrase, without error, 9 out of 10 times, 10 out of 10 times, or within 90 seconds. Sometimes there's processes that, to do it well and be successful, you have to do them within a certain amount of time. So you can say the students will be able to do this within 90 seconds. And that's D for degree. So these A, B, C's, and D's, along with the other foundational topics, these are perfect ways to kind of begin thinking about how can I make great performance objectives to meet the goal or meet the overall purpose of my class. All right. So Aaron, can I give it back to you here for the domains of learning?
Yeah, perfect. So now we're going to get into some of these domains of learning where we're actually going to start to look at, okay, we understand those ABCDs that David shared. We understand we need, clearly measurable criteria. We need to be able to, tell a student this is what we expect of you, and the student knows this is what the educator instructor expects of me, and they can, be able to perform the criteria or not. It's clearly, we can basically answer at the end of it a yes or no, did they meet the criteria? And so now as we're getting into the domains of learning, we are going to start to touch on some of the things, and Linda, you bring up one that we're going to touch on later too, so very nice. We are going to bring up kind of some of these domains that you might be looking at, and most of us will be familiar with some of the ideas, some of the types of objectives that derive from them, while some of the others, like the first one here, which is one of my personal favorites, and we're gonna have some ideas come in for this and have a couple of questions related to this. But the first one here is affective or effective. However you want to pronounce it, perfectly okay. But it is dealing with feelings, with values, motivations, attitudes. It's basically looking at things that we might otherwise think, well, how can you put this in a performance objective? Is this truly measurable? And also, there's probably some of you that go and think, well, why does it matter? And so the benefits of the affective, we can see some of the various verbiage associated with that, capturing, seeking, justifying, respecting, and some of these. The really important thing to know about affective is that regardless of what you're teaching, regardless of the subject matter, the students, or anything like that, we need to look at the fact that when we have our students coming in, we're not only trying to teach them knowledge of material, we're not only trying to teach them how to practically do things, but we're also trying to get somewhat of a shift in their mindset, have like an attitudinal shift, either from a negative perception on maybe mathematics to a positive perception, or even in a mindset from being a novice to a professional, just changing that attitude of how they feel about things, how they look at things, and overall how they go in and consider things. And one of the big reasons for this, if you go and think of your learner sets that have come into your schools, once we get to, secondary or post-secondary education, once we're looking at, the college level, all students come in, or at least vast majority of them come in because they are choosing to continue their education. And all these students, for one reason or another, have a rationale for why they're choosing to continue their education. And for many of them, it might be, to get more money, to support their family, to get a better job. But these are all basically rationales and reasons that they might be coming through the doors, coming into your classroom. And so because of these reasons, we really need to focus on some of this verbiage as well, focus on some of these, attitudinal-based performance objectives, some of these effective performance objectives, so that we can be sure what the student is wanting coming in, we're able to, have a transformative process where they come through the door, they do learn the material, they are able to practically apply it, and they are ready to, go back out into the real world and perform that job. They have, the confidence to do so. They have the mindset to do so. And so that's where we're starting to get with a lot of these affective objectives and this idea of affective. And so on the next slide here, we actually have a discussion, because I want people to start sharing some ideas, thinking about this, thinking about your learner set, and thinking about, what do they want coming in? What is your learner set like? Are they all, coming in for better jobs? Are they coming in for better opportunities? So how do you believe some of these learning objectives can fit into your class or program when considering those learners? And so as you start to basically think about this, one of the other ideas that I want to toss forward from my work, my experience, is that in a lot of professions, especially, more technical related, there will be, if you're thinking IT, there might be customer support. We're having to have a mindset, have a attitude of, well, I have a frustrated customer. How do I deal with that? How do I stay level-headed? How do I go about that? Or if you are in a medical type field, a nursing assistant degree, a veterinary technician, you're dealing with, people and patients that, one might be very sick, or you're having to, talk through things with them. You're having to connect with them more than just a knowledge or practical based level. And you might also have to yourself cope with ideas that people don't have to do the treatment that you recommend. People have the ability to say, nope, I'm not going to do that. And so you need to have that mindset of your own, as well as being able to impart it on them so they can understand, and be able to look at you from that knowledge sector, from the practical sector that you're also building up. Or then in business, in some management positions, being able to motivate your employees rolls into this attitudinal type of idea, or this affective type of learning domain, where you're having to find ways to motivate them beyond just do your job. How do you go about that? And so some of these courses, when we start to look at them, there are performance objectives that will fit very well. And David, are you seeing some of them starting to roll in?
Oh yeah, there's a lot of great ones. Sheila is kind of expounding on yours, and she says, a lot of types of fields that we get into are going to be customer service oriented. Like you mentioned, work with patients or customers. So that's going to be good for the effective learning objectives. I'm trying to see here. Leonard
I
and
see
Jack,
some other ones with
yeah,
empathizing with
empathizing.
patients, yeah,
Yep.
to improve their care. Yeah,
Yes.
because that morale in medicine has been shown to, go so far to help that just healing process with the medicine itself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's like a lot of, there's a lot of good ones coming in, and all of them focus on this, keeping that drive or that motivation from the student's point of view, but then flipping it a little bit and saying, well, at the end goal, they need to work with patients and customers, and so they need to have that feeling part of it because they might have to empathize with them. On the same turn, too, I see that people are saying, they're going to work with other coworkers. So like one of
Mhm.
them said, there's cooperate is one of the verbs that they had up there, and so they need to not only work with customers and patients, they need to work with their fellow employees. and maybe work on a team. So a lot of good ones.
Mhm. Yeah, and some of these things that are coming in here, I really like that we're starting to kind of touch on that idea that this affective, it's, going back to something we actually discussed a little more in the previous webinar, but this idea of intrinsic motivation, that some people are coming in because they're motivated, they're self-motivated for various reasons. A student might come in either, I like someone went and shared that in the medical, they have some uh, family members that possibly are sick, and so they have seen the great care
Hmm.
that the nurses or doctors are providing. They want to go back and they want to be able to help people as well. So some of those motivations to, we want to embrace those. We want to grow them and continue with them. And David, I think in your, teaching experience,
Hmm.
there's some good ones for students like early on in some of the like just kind of student type courses
Yeah.
that you have some examples of.
Yeah, a lot of the ones about drive and motivation and knowing why they're there and stuff. We do have a student success course, and those objectives sometimes kind of lean towards more of the effective, and I can kind of get away because it's a little bit easier to lean that way. But I think it's important to keep that reminder and that end goal in mind, no matter what class you're in, whether it's a general ed English course or whatever you have at your campus, or like I would say a core course they're in the medical or cosmetology type of field.
Mhm. And then another couple things coming in, excuse me, in the handouts you can see a copy of the presentation.
Hmm.
So you can see, all the slides back there that show some of the verbs for this affective domain for sure. And um, that will definitely be helped. And I really like the idea that was brought up of being able to work with a lot of different types of coworkers. So this does, give an idea of how do you work within potentially a community, a team, and building some of these ideas, team building, cooperation, there's seldom a field or occupation where you're on your own.
Hmm.
And, in the same way that, me and David are giving this presentation together, have worked on everything together, it was really important for us to build up a rapport with each other, know how to work with each other. And in a lot of fields, it is, the better you're able to work with people, including people that you might find difficult, not have a lot in common with, disagree with, or even just come from different backgrounds. These attitudinal types of, or sorry, affective types of performance objectives can really start to, get you to understand, as some people are saying, empathize, and really get in the mindset and be able to work and cooperate better with others.
Hmm. Perfect. All right. Well, thank you guys. I appreciate all the comments. And if there's anything else that comes up, said feel free to keep shooting them on there. I'm going to jump into what I think is going to be our bread and butter type of objectives, at least what I find in my experience. And these are the psychomotor objectives. And these are designed to build a physical skill. And this is like the do part, like the doing, the hands-on. But with that in mind, there are like different types of this doing objective, this psychomotor objective. And so when I think of this, I think of different stages of a student demonstrating a physical skill. And what we do is we start with kind of like the easier to the more difficult ones. So I have them listed here from the top, which is going to be the easiest one. So let's start with perception. This focuses on students like perceiving how to respond a certain way. So when you think of like action verbs, I like to think of, distinguish, identify, and select. Some of like the lower level ones, like they could just kind of see how things are what the process is. They might not be actually doing it yet, but they're distinguishing it. They're identifying maybe key aspects or parts of it. Some other action verbs I could come up with, maybe chooses, describes, detects, differentiates. So those are perception ones. So climbing up the ladder here, the next one we have is sets. And so sex is the next step, and this focuses on the student's readiness to begin or act. So they're right there. So verbs like demonstrate and show, or maybe verbs like begins, displays, explains, reacts, shows, or states. Those are some ones are set. So they're like coming from perception where they're just kind of getting the idea stuff. And they're like on the cusp or beginning to do actually the do part of whatever objective you want them to do. And so we've worked our way all the way up to guided response. And this is where a student may receive maybe assistance during the steps to complete a physical task, or they can imitate you as the expert or the instructor as the expert. And this is a good place to kind of push that practice makes perfect mentality or that trial and error method. So this is actually where they're starting to do stuff, they're learning it, or getting a good grasp of the process. So good verbs for these ones are attempt, initiate, try. You might also have ones like responds, reproduces because they're imitating you, or follows because they're following maybe you as the expert. So those are some verbs to kind of keep in mind. And so going one step further, they've kind of, getting the idea, they're almost ready. Now they're ready and they're kind of practicing, kind of building up that skill. What they have next is this mechanism. And these are like responses and actions that become natural for the student. I think of proficiency when I think of mechanism. They're proficient. They don't fumble around anymore. They can do it. They got it down. Done. And they can just do it real quickly, maybe without thinking about it too much. It becomes natural. And right around the same area is complex response. And so in addition to maybe the basic steps being accomplished more easily, more complex actions are possible, and maybe they can be obtained by the students. So both of these, I kind of grouped them together because both of these have verbs that center around like carry out or operate or perform. And just some other ones to throw out there. I've used assembles or calibrates, manipulates, measures, sketches, just depending on your type of field. And usually if you use psychomotor objectives and you're doing the complex ones, they're kind of like the same verbs, but indication in that objective language signifies that it's done like quicker or more efficient or more accurate. And this is where that time comes down. They can do it in 90 seconds. They can do it 9 out of 10 times or so on. This is, building up, they can carry out the basic functions. Can they do it, even quicker? Can they do more complex things? Especially when you're working with patients or customers, there might be, more complex actions that you might have to do, some critical things that you might want to do. And so lastly, to round out this slide, we have adaptation and origination. And these ones are tougher to get to because these take, usually time to develop that basic skill, that complex knowledge. But these center on student movements and actions that are kind of modified, usually on the go for special situations. So as a lot of you know, because a lot of you might be practitioners in addition to being instructors, is that there's special situations going on with patients and customers. So can the student take what they know with the mechanism or complex response and adapt it or build and make their own thing out of something based on that special circumstance that might happen? And so you have adapt or changes, create, design, originate. So those ones are a little bit tougher to get to, but it's really nice to see a student, not only could follow directions really well, but they could adapt to a certain procedure. And then just to kind of push you the idea of how to get there, sometimes we have demonstrations where a student will, take the blood pressure of somebody. And then we hand out cards that only the quote unquote patient knows, and they do something or they have some type of ailment and they say something. And that's how you kind of get that student from going from just the mechanism to more the complex response, more to the adaptation or origination. So, it's not always because, again, you're never going to have the same exact procedure happening for every single person. People are different, customers are different, patients are different. So it's having that ability to adapt or change or originate something based on a certain special circumstance.
And David, idea just came in asking about where role playing kind of fits in.
Excellent.
What that would be. And I really like that one because if you can run the slide back quickly.
Yeah. Yep. No problem.
If not,
nope, I got it. Yeah. Nope.
There we go. Perfect. So I really like that one because it actually, depending on how you set up a scenario, it can touch on a variety of different ones within this because it could be origination where you're creating a scenario and so people are role playing, but if you give limited scripts, if you give limited direction, they might have to, take it and basically run with it.
Yep, that's perfect because that's what we try to do is we try to give more script to the patient more so than the person doing the process or practicing, because then they have to think on the fly because they don't know what's coming up.
Yeah, but that's definitely a great example for psychomotor, doing that role-playing idea. And that brings in, honestly, some of the other ones as well. yeah, the affective, and the one we're going to talk about now, cognitive.
Yep. Okay. There we go. I'll throw this your way, Aaron.
Okay. Yes, so we are going to get into the one that, people probably, mostly when you're designing performance objectives, when you look at when you think about just learning in general, it comes back to cognitive. And cognitive, you're going to see there's definitely an overlap of cognitive kind of covering over some of the affective, some of the psychomotor, and incorporating some of that. But we have it as a separate one because it is really knowledge driven. Psychomotor, it has ones that overlap. Affective has ones that overlap, but cognitive not only has its own, so if you had like a Venn diagram, it would be in the middle where it would overlap with the other two, but then it has its own of we're looking at developing that initial knowledge base, developing that initial understanding, and that starts touching into what someone brought up earlier with performance objective, which is Bloom's taxonomy. There we go. And so Bloom's taxonomy, it's basically a framework. And the first thing I want to say with it being a framework is that it is not necessarily right, and someone not using it is not necessarily wrong. It's basically a framework that, people have started to see that, hey, this looks right. In the same way that, learning theories, people say, hey, we say trends in this and this. Bloom's taxonomy has developed as a framework that a lot of people use because it just works kind of nicely. You see, as you start utilizing it, it makes sense. The way that people have been teaching and that you guys probably teach your courses, it fits into this. And so Bloom's taxonomy has these different levels of remembering, understanding, applying, analyzing, evaluating, and creating. And traditionally, you start basically at that bottom with remembering, moving up to creating, and the pyramid structure is kind of the idea that, well, in order to get to that point where you know enough that and you're able to apply enough that you're able to actually create, you have to go through these other steps that are lower on the pyramid and spend, time remembering things, understanding things, starting to apply things, and going all these steps that we'll start to look at a little more in depth. So the first one, the bottom tier, we have remembering. And this is that base level. A student comes into your course, they are a career changer, and previously they were just working at a department store, and now they're coming in for their first IT course ever. And they need that foundational knowledge. They need to be able to remember things. And we're going to get back to a fun little thing of one of the key action verbs that we have here is know. And know is one that it's a little harder to kind of put that criteria for. As we talked about earlier, it fits into that, how do you know something? Well, as long as you establish nice criteria with it, you can, work with that. So know definitions of, these components of a computer. Then we get into, listing, labeling, describing. So you can have various activities, having a diagram of the human body where they have to go and label things. That would be an actionable criteria for some sort of anatomy-based course. Then the recognition, defining things, recalling things, and even memorization, because as we all know, in order to kind of get that foundational knowledge, we have to be able to, remember and memorize these ideas, these concepts, so that we can later recall them and start going up the tiers for it. And then ideas like recognize, again, acquiring, recording, naming, using, matching games. Oh yeah, this definition applies to this. Again, we're focusing just on the most foundational level at this point. So until we get higher up, we're going to focus on very simple ideas and ones that are very easy to execute. So then the next level up, after you have learned some basic material, after you've remembered things, remembering facts, numbers, definitions, you now have to actually go and understand what you're remembering. I like to think of, very young school children of they go and learn their times tables. And that's basically in that remembering section, but what are they actually doing? You know, when we were back, you know, remembering multiplication tables and simple things like that, was there any true understanding to that of what we were doing other than, you know, 8 times 8 is 64? We remember that, we know it's true, but this understanding lines kind of gets to, well, why is that true? How can I start to put some understanding to what I'm remembering, what I'm learning? And so ideas like comprehend, explain, summarize, and translate. I really like the idea of, you know, summarizing. If you are giving a lecture to students and they are taking notes, as someone just said, rewriting in their own words, you know, they're going and taking notes and they're having to basically take what they're remembering, what they're hearing, and translate it into something they can understand. This is how I understand what Aaron is saying right now. And exploratory activities are ones that I'm a huge fan of, where you go and say, okay, we just learned about some of the basic human skeletal structure. Now, I want you to go online and start researching a specific portion further. Start understanding, why is it there? Why is it the way it is? And so some of this gets into putting students in charge of their own learning, kind of getting back to that affective idea of trying to get some motivation for them. And so that's one that I really like, having them go through the process and develop their own understanding, because again, we can't impart understanding on students. They have to take the step from us giving them the knowledge and them being able to understand it in their own way. So we can help facilitate that. But this understanding process, it's very individually based. And then the explain in your own words, similar to taking notes, you're going in, writing things as you see it, as you perceive it, and as you literally understand it.
Yeah, it's perfect, Aaron. I just want to add real quick here is that just some of the applications of taking notes and how maybe you can get to that summarized so they can reach that understanding instead of just regurgitating what you lecture to them or read in a book, is that I kind of force some of my students to write a summary statement. We do it in a Cornell style type of notes where, on one side of the page, they write questions they may have during my lecture. On the right side of the page, they write their actual notes. And I always dedicate the bottom, so at the end we get to the end of a topic or maybe the end of the lecture, I say, okay, write it's almost like an elevator pitch, write a summary of what we just talked about. And I always say, if you can do this well, then you probably get it. If you struggle a little bit, make a note and say you might have to, go over this material because you're just, you're doing more of that base of the pyramid. You're just kind of memorizing things and not really knowing the why or how it's applied. So I just want to kind of share one thing that I try to do to get people jumping up that pyramid a little bit.
Yeah, and that's a great example. And yeah, there's so many wonderful examples for this. And, establishing this understanding, as David said, having them start to, answer, get their questions answered, set up that style of writing, we really get to this idea of now applying. Once they develop this full understanding, they can actually apply what they've learned. So, I like using IT examples because it's really, simple to kind of understand where we're coming from with some of it. So you've learned the various components of a computer. Most of us are using a computer right now to view this. So you've learned the various components, and now you need to apply your knowledge and understanding to access this webinar, which we all actually went through a small process of this for just getting on here and connecting to the webinar. We might have had a link that we had to use, then set up the programmer, set up the connection, even just booting up a computer and starting all that. It starts with first remembering, then understanding why this is happening, and then applying it to get to this point. Obviously, in our courses, going a little further than that. And so we have some nice verbs of like construct, demonstrate, discover, relate. And so these are enforcing this understanding. We're going through activities that might reinforce this understanding, creating processes, or doing collaborative learning. And so we're really, again, just taking all the foundational knowledge, all the that foundational, possibly just sitting, talking, and actually putting that to use. And so this could be at a very simple level, starting to touch on psychomotor even, where, again, doing something on a computer that you learned about and you understand the process for. And so once you've gone through the process of doing some apply things, we get to this idea of analyzing, where analyzing is saying, okay, we remember, we understand, we can apply it. Now let's look at this. Let's look at a situation. Let's look at a hypothesis. Let's look at a problem, and let's see if we can solve it. And yeah, Leonard, so understanding is basically verbalizing, applying gets into doing, and then as we go up this ladder, you'll see like the analyzing, it's doing further. It's knowing how to do it. Now, let's analyze a situation. We have a, broken computer. Here is all the information for it. How do we go about figuring out what's wrong? What are the steps? How can we analyze the situation? You have a patient that comes in sick. Well, where do you start? You start with the symptoms, you analyze the symptoms, analyze whatever test results you might have, doing your examination, and so this is part of that analyzing process. And so it's basically you're getting information, you're making ideas, you're making determinations based off of this information, and truly getting a greater understanding than just applying. You're demonstrating that not only do you have those skills to apply, you have the skills to look at a situation and identify a problem and solve it. So again, going a step above. And then even going further than that is evaluating, which some people may have some trouble at times going and conflating the two a little, because analyzing, you're looking at a situation and a troubleshooting situation or something like that. Evaluation comes to the point of being able to actually interpret those results of the analysis, or being able to provide greater rationale to something, being able to look back on a situation and the process and say, okay, this is what went right, this is what went wrong, this is why that happened. And so we get into some of this evaluation, and again, as we're going up Bloom's taxonomy, there's kind of less and less application, less and less variance, because the way that it's structured, we're kind of going towards more specified types of activities and more specified just results that we're looking for even. In evaluating, you're looking to see, well, do they fully understand everything? Can they apply? Can they, analyze the situation? And now can they provide their results and rationale for everything? And then the last step on that pyramid is actually creating. This is saying, hey, I am, no longer a novice coming into this course. I am able to do, a final project where I can show, hey, I can design this system. I can, construct this situation or reconstruct a situation. You can write a manual, design a machine, integrate some form of training, or do procedural revisions. Basically, this is the process of taking everything that you have learned, everything you've applied, everything you've evaluated, and you're saying, I can start from scratch, I can create a situation, I can create a solution, I can provide rationale. You are doing everything in this process. And so this is basically, one of them that would be like an overarching learning objective that really, looks at it and says, hey, by the end of the course, this might not be an individual, lesson, but maybe you're looking, the end of the course, this is what we're trying to achieve. And so that's what we're kind of looking at. And then this is basically bringing Bloom's taxonomy full circle. And I want to, pose a question to people just to start talking about, and then myself and David will kind of share our thoughts on this. But looking at Bloom's taxonomy, kind of what, I'm going to pose two questions actually, slightly different from on here, but what kind of breakdown do you think some of these stages of Bloom's taxonomy should be as you're looking to develop performance objectives or activities that, attach those performance objectives? And then also, which of these levels do you think, not necessarily is best, but which do you think is most important? Do you think, the remembering part, the applying for your students, which of these levels are starting to just be the most important? And David, I want to toss that question over to you. For, students you work with, what do you
Yeah,
think on some of
good
those levels?
question.
Which is the most important, and how would you break down some of it?
Put me in the spot here, huh? I think to me, I have a couple different things, but to be truthful, my pyramid would be shorter and fatter at the bottom. And I say that because my goal, of course, is to have the students be successful in the workplace. But a stepping stone to that is passing that vendor exam. And so, if there's no like actual lab type of component to the exam, most of the exams that I've experienced with our students is a multiple choice, true false, matching type of exam where they sit for it and do stuff. And so, to me, that remembering, understanding, and maybe a little bit applying is what I really want to focus on. But at the same time, like that to me is like the C average. That's what should get the student by. They should, be able to pass that vendor exam and get on it. But I think the top level, which is, I still want to hit those analyzing, evaluating, creating. That's like the extra icing on the cake to be even better, make yourself more attractive to a potential employer. Do you think? Do you have something that you've been through, Aaron, or have experienced or utilized in your own courses?
Yeah, so for me personally, I'm actually looking, a little higher than David. I really like applying and even analyzing because I think, and again, there is no right answer to this. I've seen many people coming in saying understanding, remembering, a couple applying, and go basically with some of that. And for me, it's more of the applying and analyzing because, we can work on remembering, understanding. Those are important. But for most of our learners, they're looking to get a job. They're looking to get an occupation. And so I put a lot of emphasis on that application and analysis because, one, we want them to be able to apply it. Once they get into the workforce, they can actually do what they were trained to do, what they learned to do. But then analyzing, because also once you get into that idea that you're in the workforce, often it's not going to be just, assemble this product. Often there is troubleshooting involved. There is looking at a situation and saying, oh, this isn't going exactly as I expected, because as we know, often things don't go perfect. And so being able to look at that and go, okay, I think I have an idea. Let me try to fix that. So that's where, I definitely like looking at. And I like some of the questions that are coming in with people asking about like Bloom's, does it work better on a class level or a program level? So it can definitely, work on both levels. You can take, these ideas and the performance objectives we've been talking about, you can take them as minute as you want. If you want to just make everything for each individual lesson plan, you can definitely move towards that. And so we can definitely kind of pick and choose how to use some of that. And I think we should probably also keep moving with the summary a little, and then we can hit questions at the end here.
Hmm. Sure.
So have at
Yeah.
it, David.
Okay. Yeah, there's a lot of great stuff. I do want to summarize because I know we're nearing the end here. If you do stick around a little bit, we'll try to answer all the questions at the very end. But just to be respectful of everybody's time, I want to make sure we hit the summary here and kind of touch upon and kind of recap some things. So, writing performance objectives, basically, if you think back at this, past 55 minutes or so, you're thinking, wow, that's a lot of stuff, right? There's so much information and so many items to remember. How do we make these objectives, which cover all these learning types and all these styles? Is it possible to do this? And this is what Aaron was touching upon, thinking about, can I make this on a programmatic level? Can I do it just in my course and so on? But I don't have a good answer for you because every situation is different. Your campus is going to be different, and goals are going to be different from everybody. But in general, I'd like you to reflect upon your class and think about those general goals first. Let's start big picture in general, and then narrow that focus and think, what objectives meet that goal. Maybe my big objectives is I want all my students to go and pass their dental exam, their vendor exam for whatever organization they take to get the dental assisting certificate. What can I do to make them meet that goal? And then I start breaking it down. Okay, how can I use Bloom's? How can I do the, thinking, the feeling, the doing, and break it down? And again, the breakdown is going to be, up to you, because maybe in my course, it's going to, be more of the, knowledge, the actual thinking about stuff, because I'm more of a foundational level course. Whereas maybe as I go through the program a little bit more, maybe more your objectives are doing. And that's okay. There's no right or wrong. But you do want to get that big picture of the whole program, and then think about your picture of your classroom and see, how that student can progress. And, they have to start with that basic knowledge somewhere, and they have to build it up. And what Aaron and I have talked about before is, like, if you think about a video game and you play, say, Super Mario Brothers, for example, level one's easier. And so it builds upon that. Like, I think most of us could probably play Mario and possibly beat level one, right? Hopefully you can, Aaron. And then go on. If I put you in level 8, if I did all this hard stuff, this creating stuff or this doing stuff, and you didn't have that beginning part of actually learning those terms or learning vocab words and stuff, I might fail. So you want to think about it like in a game where it's like it's easier and harder and harder and harder, and that's whether it's through your class or through the whole program. And kind of think of that with these performance objectives in mind, so that student can be successful, in the class, of course, academically, be successful when they take the vendor exam, and be successful in a workplace environment where, that's what they're achieving to be at the very end.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
David, I do want to add a
yeah,
activity that someone shared
yeah.
that they do. So, someone shared that they do, Q&A activity with their students, and I really like that one, is that
Yeah.
actually it touches on various levels of Bloom's depending on, one, how the conversation's going, but then, just continuing it. You can go so many different directions based off of, our your students getting it? Is everything being understood? Okay, if it is, I'm going to take this a step further. I'm going to give some scenarios, make them work through some of that. And so, yeah, we're really looking at some of that. And then another question that came in, so learning types, we are referring to some of the learning domains we've looked at,
Mhm.
but if we're talking about like different types of learning types or learner types, it could even be, just all your students coming in. We might be looking at, so when writing performance objectives, we need to, know our learner set. We need to be able to try to appeal to the widest group of learners. And so we could, so for like that, we're looking at the larger learning domain set. And David, I want to make sure that you share the little quick thing that actually someone had shared in the questions earlier
Mhm.
too, alluding to our last slide here.
Yes, since I like cutesy word stuff, like the ABCDs, I do want to conclude on one. And I always like to say, be smart when you're thinking about and writing performance objectives. And smart just means be specific, like we said. Don't make it too broad, make it focused, make it measurable, which the great chat people have said all throughout, which is perfect. Make sure it's attainable. Set a goal that is attainable. They can reach that goal, but it pushes them to a limit. Don't make it too easy. Don't make it too difficult. Find that sweet spot. Make it relevant. So when I think of relevant, I think of make it something that they could apply in the job workforce. Because again, that's they're going to be the end goal for our students. So make it relevant. Make it mean something. Sometimes when we're in a general ed course, which I teach some general ed courses too, or have taught some of them too, um, it's a little bit more difficult to try to make it relevant if you're not actually like in a laboratory course, doing procedures or working in a lab environment. But at the same time, I always try to think of ways to, why do I have to take English, or why do I have to take effective communication, for example. Well, I always try to relate to how that can be put into a job skill that could help them get that interview, pass that interview, and get that job. So always think about that end goal in mind, and make it relevant and make it time bound. Make sure they can meet those goals in the amount of time, whether it's your whole class, the entire program, or like we talked about before, just make sure you have a good mix of stuff. And and in that amount of time that you have them, they do a good amount of the knowledge or the doing or the feeling, and that's going to be up to you to see what that proportion might be. So that is the end goal of ours, is be smart. And then we just want to say, if there's any questions, stick around. I think it's exactly on the hour here, so I do want to be respectful of your time. And Aaron, I thank you so much for spending the hour with us. In the handouts, there is the sign-in sheet if you want to print one out for your own campus. We do have the certificate down there as well. You will get emailed a link to it too. So if you can't grab it right away, or if you have some trouble getting the handouts, ACCSC will be delivering you the certificates, and the recording too will be sent out to you guys later. And then a copy of our presentations on there. We did want to put, I wanted to put, and Aaron wanted to put as many verbs as we could on, but not like bog down the presentation. So hopefully we found a sweet spot. But if there's any questions, or if you want more verbs, or you're tripped up in an area, definitely let us know. I know sometimes you click out of here and then you think of something later on. Just jot down our emails, aaron.appleby@Ciena.com, or myself, david.grimes@Ciena.com. You could find us on the web and Facebook in case you can't remember our emails. But if you have a question or something we couldn't get to you, or you're working on maybe writing performance objectives, whether it's later today or 10 months from now, keep us in mind, and we will definitely help you out. We want to be your teacher assistant, I guess, and make sure you can be successful. Because not only do I want my students to be successful in my class, and Aaron wants to be have his students successful in his class, we want you guys to be successful too. I think we're all in this together. We all, I think, love what we do, and we all love to see our students graduate and get in the job field. So we're definitely here to help. And then, like I said, if you want to get your materials, you could more than welcome to jump off. But we do want to stick around. Hopefully, we could stick around a little bit longer. I know we could usually go about 10 after. But we'll try to answer some questions, because there's some really good questions coming through. So if you want to stick around. We'll try to answer some questions. If not, thank you so much for being with us today. We have some more webinars coming up. You can check those out on the ACCSC website. And if we can, hopefully we see you again maybe next week.
Yep, that sounds great. And as David said, we'll answer some of the questions that you still have. If anyone has additional questions they want to share, we can definitely respond to that now with some bonus time here.
Yeah.
And so someone's asking about learning types and whether we mean visual, auditory, kinesthetic, personality. And basically the quick answer is yes. I think the idea of, saying someone's an auditory learner or someone is, a visual learner, it's a little antiquated in just saying, hey, this is how this person learns. But instead, when we're talking about different learning types and how the performance objectives need to hit that, we're looking at each individual person. And so, for my students, I don't like grouping them necessarily into saying, hey, you're this type of learner. But instead, we need to look at the various ways that learners, in fact, learn. So they might learn through visual ways, through auditory ways, through kinesthetic ways, through, looking at some of the blooms they can learn through remembering, understanding, applying. And so we need to just be cognizant of the different ways that learners may obtain information, and that not all learners learn the same. And so one of the things we'll actually start to get into a little more with the next couple of webinars next week is kind of some of the application of some of these things, where we touch on diversifying activities and assessments in trying to appeal to, again, any type of learner that might come into your course. Because you might have had, 90% this subset of learner, and the next session you could have only 40% of that subset, and just a different type of learner group entirely. So that's where we're kind of getting to with the idea of these different learners and talking about some of the different types of performance objectives, how to kind of touch on the way all different people learn. Because even if you think about yourself, like for me personally, I do need that foundational knowledge. I like listening to things, I like reading things, I like, watching educational shows. But then when it comes down to it, I'm in the Bloom's taxonomy side of applying in higher. I want to get my hands dirty. I need some of the knowledge, but that's a little quicker for me, and it's not going to be as effective. So I'm really always waiting for, okay, we're learning stuff, okay, I'm gonna kind of phase out of some of the rest of it. I want to start doing this. And so, just kind of knowing that learners can be all different
Hmm.
and that, we can't, I think it's basically not putting anyone or even any class in any kind of box at all and leaving ourselves open to the idea there's so many different ways people learn.
Yep, and I think what I think of it, Aaron, is I think a preferred learning style. There's definitely
Mhm.
people who have a preferred learning style, and I do want to hit that because like Aaron says, he can only take so much of one before he gets maybe not as motivated or even bored of something, and that's what you have to think about with these different objective types is that you're going to differentiate your class almost on purpose because of these. You're going to have some areas and activities once you make these objectives to make it more knowledge based where they are memorizing or reading, but there might be some more of that doing stuff too. So if you have these objectives that really hit the swath of different types of learners and preferred learning styles, that will help you kind of differentiate your classroom and not always accidentally fall into only doing one certain type because you might be leaving out some people who prefer to do something else.
Okay, and then another question that came in, which is a very good one, um, that I think we've kind of, we conflate the terms a little. Performance objectives and learning objectives, they can be synonymous.
Hmm.
When we go and use them, we just jump from one to the other. Oftentimes people are considering the same things. Mostly you're looking contextually because when you're thinking, at least for me, and David, feel free to weigh in, I kind of think of performance objectives, often these are like my course objectives that I'm making, but sometimes, I'll call them learning objectives, but more so, I look at performance objectives as more course-based. Learning objectives, maybe a given lesson or a set, but ultimately, it's just the context of that I think that matters. Would you agree with that, David?
Yeah, yeah. If you were to look it up and stuff, people will call them, very, different things. Not different things, but different performance objectives or learning objectives. They kind of mean the same thing in general. When I say I do use both. I think by accident, but I look at them as objectives for the course. And if you, depending on the recommendations or the requirements from your association or not, you may have to have weekly objectives, and I think it's important to have weekly objectives, weekly performance objectives, weekly learning objectives. So to break it down even further, and that's the type of stuff that I said, Aaron. Well, we'll jump into some of the next type of webinars is kind of mapping that weekly objective maybe to the overall course objectives or certain lesson objectives to the course objective. Yeah, but to me, they're all this. They're one and the same. My coworkers use all different ones. I use different ones. We all mean the same thing. It's just that objective, whether it's course or weekly or class objective.
Yeah, and for the second part of the question there, also, as David started kind of alluding to,
Hmm.
we are going to, on Tuesday's webinar, we'll be discussing course mapping and developing some of the activities, which will then start to focus a little more on how you can, to answer your question, yes, you can adapt activities to meet the learning types, learning needs of various learners. And then next Thursday's one is going to be, it's my favorite, on assessments and how you can actually diversify those in order to better connect with learning types. And then I saw some people asking about, let's see, so about the auditory, visual, kinesthetic,
Hmm.
and if you're using that, it's definitely not a bad thing. I apologize if, yeah, it came off anything like that. It's not a bad thing to have that or utilize that as a general framework. It's just the idea we're trying to get across is that, you can use that to kind of see for students. It's a really good gauge to see, oh, apparently, for me, I take that, I'm going to get more of a kinesthetic learner. It's something that, I'm very aware of, and, it's definitely helpful. But what we don't want to do is, as an educator, you definitely don't want to, paint a box that all of your students will either fall into box A, B, or C of auditory, visual, and kinesthetic, that it's actually, more of a Venn diagram, more of a, overlapping of circles where they're falling into all of these categories, And it might just be that in their remembering understanding phases of Bloom's, that if they're watching a video, that soaks up better. But once they get to the application or the analysis, then they really need to be kinesthetic and hands-on. Or another student might say, hey, I'm more, they might be more visual on that analysis idea where they look back, assess everything. They want to watch someone do something and they can say, yep, I know what they're doing wrong, I know what they're doing right. So it's just understanding that there isn't a box. There isn't a set criteria. And so again, definitely not bad to use those. For learners, it definitely helps to get that self-realization of, oh, this is kind of a general idea of how I learn best. But the important thing to make sure for us as educators, and even to inform our students of, is that this is not your identity. Like, it's not a straight identity. My identity is not a straight kinesthetic learner, but instead, it could be a preference that I have when given the option.
Yep.
And so that's kind of where we're getting with some of that.
Yeah, I was just going to add on, Aaron, is that I actually like that stuff because I like it just for the fact that I want them not to paint themselves as most of my students will say, I'm a hands-on person. I can only learn hands-on. And what we do is we take, I'm sure you might have experienced, taking those online quizzes or, paper quiz that kind of suggest what type of your preferred learning style is. But I always emphasize, that's your preferred one. So if we do something in class and it's hands-on, but your preference is, like Aaron said, maybe you're more of a reader and get all the terms out first, then you might have to make adjustments sometimes, and you're not, you might have to do something different. At the same time, I like taking the quiz or have the quizzes myself as an instructor, because then, say in lab environment, and I want to do a demonstration. Well, that's, it's kind of hands-on, but there's going to be certain people that I know who really like that stuff. So I'm going to call upon them to be my, test subject, or to go in and show everybody a procedure or so on. And I know there's some students in my class that are more of like, they like to sit back and observe first or write down notes. So I don't try to I don't actually call on them and put them on the spot, because you know what? They prefer sitting back and watching somebody. Well, I have somebody who wants to jump right in and be a doer. So that helps me as an educator to kind of get a feel for my students and know them a little bit better, so I can set up my classes, my activities, and even my objectives that way. That way, if I do have some doing stuff, I could still utilize people who are not the doer. They're more of the thinker or the feeler type thing.
Yeah, and I think that's really good.
Mm-hmm.
And then we had another question asking about kind of, this looks like it's probably dealing a little more with the affective idea of, students who were told in high school they're bad readers, bad at math.
Yeah.
And I have dealt with so many of those students. I have done a lot of work with math. I really like, the analytical number nature of everything like that. And one of the big things is, focusing on that attitudinal subset, the affective subset of making sure that you have a goal in mind that you can't just teach them the information. They're not going to be confident. They're not going to, even respect themselves in terms of their ability to understand, because honestly, they've had, crummy teachers that have given them a negative view of themselves and how they learn. And so the big stretch is focusing on that affective idea of saying, okay, clean slate. We're going to, work with you and get you to a point where you're able to do what you want. They might have other strengths and they might need, a little more support, but having those performance objectives, again, as David was saying, attainable. Depending on the level of your learners, you might have a performance objective with math because, if it's a, just tossing out a type of program like a nursing program, you have to use math to do computations for, dosages and things like that. And so, a student that thinks, hey, I wanted to be a nurse, but all this math, this is discouraging, this is, causing me difficulties. You need to get them focused more to, well, what do they need to know? what sort of steps would help them with that and encourage them with that. Set those, affective performance goals to start changing their mindset that you don't have to be an accountant. You do not have to be a Shakespearean literary major. You just, need to be able to do what you need to be able to do. And then, the rest of your strengths, which is typically the program they're going into or want to go into, those will come to support those and bring those lesser skills up, because we definitely all have things that, we struggle with. And the main way to kind of deal with that is to understand it's part of a bigger process, it's part of a bigger picture. And so that's where, I definitely think those affective performance objectives, setting that motivation, trying to have an attitudinal shift, and having them basically understand also why they should value what they are going through, why they should value that process and that idea, because some of them will also have a very negative perception of mathematics or reading. I had some students I was working with, not post-secondary, but high school age students who, 90% of them just abhor math. They want nothing to do with it. And one of the ways I was able to connect with some of those students was by likening it to things that they really liked and enjoyed, connecting it to sports and talking about how, every aspect of sport deals with, velocity, various aspects of physics, angles, and just things like that, and get them to, see this from a perspective they like. And so when you're looking at their program and what they need to know with a subject that they might otherwise hate, you need to look at it from a perspective of, okay, in the position they're trying to get to, and if they're looking back down, how can they look at it to appreciate it for what it is? And once you start to have that shift, then you can start building up that confidence. Then they can start kind of understanding it better and being able to, put it to practice better.
All right. I think we have time for one more question, Aaron? Can we get one more in there?
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh yeah, if there's any that are there. Yeah.
Yeah, okay, just checking. Just want to make sure. And other than that,
Yeah. Yeah, I think that
okay.
might be all the questions,
All right.
though. So
Perfect. That's perfect timing then. All right. Well, again, thank you for all the people who stayed on. We really appreciate it. Again, if you have something that comes in mind, or you just couldn't explain it so easily in the chat, send us an email, and we'll be more than happy to talk to you. And again, our main goal is to all help each other. Whether Aaron's helping me, I'm helping Aaron, or we're helping you. And you definitely helped us today with a lot of great ideas. I'm going to write down and borrow and use that in quotes, because there's a lot of good content out there, and that's what I like about these, is sharing this content. So hopefully you enjoyed yourself. I really appreciate you guys taking the time to be with us, and hopefully we see some of you next Tuesday.
Yep. Have a wonderful day, everyone.
Yeah, thank you so much.